وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه أما بعد. So we've really finished the theoretical part of the workshop or this seminar this evening. And what we're now going to do, insha'Allah ta'ala, is we're going to move on to the more practical applications. And I'm going to start by giving a few to get you thinking. But then after that, insha'Allah, I'm going to ask you guys to contribute. And the way I'm going to ask you to contribute, insha'Allah, is that we can just, you don't need a microphone or anything like that. You can just speak out, insha'Allah. People can just maybe raise their hands, and maybe one of the volunteers on the sister's side can choose one of the sisters to speak. And we can basically just hear from you guys about the practical aspects. But that's going to come. First of all, I'm going to give you some ideas. So, one of the scenarios that we commonly get asked about is dawah at work. Dawah at work. Based on what we've learned, we're not going to go outside of what we learned and start talking about some different things, but within what we have learned today, how do we approach dawah at work? So let's take it into, let's break down dawah at work into elements or segments. First of all, how do we introduce the topic of Islam? Because once we get the topic of Islam going, once we have the topic of Islam going, that can give us opportunities to give da'wah. So that's going to involve certain things. We can break it down. And all of these can be used. It's not like you use one of them and not others. So you can use the good character and the good manners and good behavior, particularly if some of your colleagues are not sharing those good manners. So you stand out as having really good manners among the people. That's one thing. The other thing you're going to need to do is find out about people, talk to people. And as you're talking to them, approach the topic of Islam and the topic of religion. And one of the ways I think it's easiest to do this is, it's really important for you to be open about your deen. So it could be something very simple like, I'm going to pray now. Can I bring you anything on the way back? Or something like that, whatever it might be. But something where you can start to introduce the topic of Islam. So you need to get the conversations going. You can't be the person that comes into work and sits down and shuts out to the world. You have to get those conversations going. When you do something that relates to Islam, try to bring Islam up in the conversation by it. Alhamdulillah, here we don't really have such a problem in terms of sort of bad things happening that are associated with Islam. But elsewhere in the world, even this can be a talking point. Something bad happens in the news relating to Islam, you can talk to people at work about it. You can tell them how Islam doesn't have a part in that, how Islam is nothing like that, and do you know what Islam is? And start explaining. And you can use anything as a starting point. But you need to do certain things. You need to get the conversation going. That means you need to talk to people. And what you talk to them about has to get Islam in there. It can't just be the personal things and the, how's work, have you finished your workload? You've got to get Islam in there. One of the ways you can get Islam in there, if you're shy, is to go and do something Islamic and to mention to them that you're going to do it. So for example, I'm going to go off to pray now, insha'Allah, God willing. Try and just a few things, get those in there. And then you could, for example, on the way back, you say, I hope my prayer break doesn't disturb you or make any extra work for you. As a Muslim, and then that's it. You've got something in there. In the beginning, it might seem a little bit difficult, a little bit shy, but just look for that opening in the conversation. Once you get that opening in the conversation, that's a different thing. That's now onto what do we say. But the first part of our discussion in the workplace is just how can I introduce the topic of Islam to someone. Even, for example, saying, do you mind if I could use this space for my prayer? Or tomorrow is Eid, which is our day of celebration, as Muslims, and anything that you can use, anything can be your stepping stone to get that topic across. But you need to set it up so that you can talk about Islam. Now when you set it up, you need to be careful that you don't set it up in such a way that you leave yourself talking about that little thing and not about the main message of Islam. Like, oh, you know, tomorrow is the day of Eid, and they say, really, Eid, what presents are you going to buy? Oh, well, I'm going to buy these for my kid. Khalas, the topic has gone away from the topic that you wanted. You wanted to use that as a stepping stone into Islam. So you need very quickly to bring it around to that. Like, you ever think about what Muslims do? Like, do you ever wonder about, you see so many Muslims around you, do you ever wonder what it is that Muslims do? You know, just try and get that conversation so you can get to this general topic of La ilaha illallah. So these are just some ideas. As we said, the way that you behave with people. So for example, if somebody, let's say there's some employees who are taking shortcuts, you know, not doing things the proper way, not doing things the way they should be. And then you do it, you know, the proper way and the way that it should be done. And someone says, oh, you know what, why don't you just cheat it like the rest of the people? You know, why don't you just do what the rest of the guys do and just, you know, write the number on the invoice, nobody minds. Say, well, it's part of my religion that in Islam we have to be fair and just, and we're not allowed to deceive and cheat people. But don't just stop there, otherwise you're just going to get an answer of, all right, okay, and you've got to get it straight into Tawheed, into Islam, into La ilaha illallah. So what you're going to do is you're going to immediately try to bring it onto La ilaha illallah by using one of these general terms like, you know, it all comes from, you can either say something like, it all comes from the fact that as Muslims we worship one God and believe that nobody deserves to be worshipped except Him. And therefore we follow and implement what it is and submit ourselves to Him and what He tells us to do. And one of the things that He told us to do is, so it's all about getting onto that topic. Or you could ask them a question. Like, did you ever ask anyone about Islam? Did you ever inquire about Islam? That's really, really useful. So this is all just about how you get that first sort of, you break the ice that first time. The interesting thing about it is, the more you practice breaking the ice, the easier it becomes. The more you practice, the first time you do it, you feel like you know, it's a big, big thing. And you hold back, you start saying something and then you hold back, you feel nervous about it. But the more you practice it and the more you do it with different people, the more comfortable you become. If you want, you could start by asking a question about them that will lead you into a question about Islam. So for example, you could start by asking them, like for example, you go off to prayer and you say to them, you don't pray? And you know, it's just a general question. It could be, oh, I don't believe in any religion, or I'm not really practicing my religion. Oh, okay, what religion are you? Or am I such and such, I'm like this. Or really, did you ever find out anything about Islam? Did you ever ask anyone about Islam? And again, you just try to get that conversation onto the topic of what Islam is. You don't really want to spend too much time on what they are, but just, you know, you can use that as something to, you know, something to lead you into the conversation. And when you get good at it, you can realize that actually almost any topic can lead you onto that conversation. Almost anything you touch upon, you can go to almost any topic, whether it's a world event, whether it's something people are talking about in the office, it's an act of behavior, because what you realize is that in Islam, everything comes back to La ilaha illallah. All of the rulings of Islam, all of the legislation, the things we do, the way that we behave, it all comes back to La ilaha illallah. So there's always a way to take something that people are talking about and to bring it onto that topic. You do have to use hikmah to decide when to bring it onto that topic. For example, one of the things you'll have to decide is whether to say this in front of a larger group or whether to say this to an individual at work. Because if you're talking about a larger group, there can be advantages in the sense that you didn't have to go through that hard process of breaking the ice with every individual person, but there are also quite big disadvantages. Number one, it's unlikely that all of them have the same religious belief. And number two, even if they do, they might support each other in it. Like one of them feels a bit stronger with the other one there. So if you have, for example, two people who are Hindus, those two may, play off each other and make it difficult for you to present your points. So you have to judge the case individually. There's no right or wrong answer. Sometimes you just can't reach people individually. But sometimes you might find, there's always a time when I might just be in a particular room at work and there's somebody there on their own. And you come in and you try and find a topic to talk about, and as soon as you start talking on the topic, you're thinking, how can I bring this onto Islam? How can I bring and introduce Islam onto this topic? And when you introduce it, you need to quickly bring that message, because you may not get another chance. Sometimes the conversation can die with, I don't like talking about religion, or I don't really talk about religion with people. And you just needed to get that message in one time. You can answer it. Even when someone says, I don't like talking about religion, you can easily respond. You can respond by saying something like, oh really, I'm the opposite. I love talking about religion. I just find it so interesting to hear about what other people believe and to tell people about what I believe. Sometimes that might help to, just to turn the situation around. And of course, if you're not comfortable, I don't want to, I wouldn't want to make you uncomfortable, but I would love to share with you some of what Islam is about. So that can also, you can even that one, you can turn it around, but it's really important. What we mean is to quickly get to that conversation. Don't leave it for a very long time drifting through lots of different topics. Try and bring it to this concept of God and La ilaha illallah, and then reinforce that message every time you're seeing that person. When you think it's wise, of course it may not be wise when they have a big audit tomorrow and it's really urgent and everyone is watching them, and you need to pick the time, but you find the time that you think it's wise to reinforce that message. It's not just one time, to repeat that message and to reinforce that message and to sort of add to it on the topic that, again, there is one God that deserves to be worshipped. And inshallah, what you're looking for is you're looking for some kind of traction, some kind of discussion, some kind of jidal billati hiya ahsan, arguing in the way that is best. Because once you've got that traction, now you can actually start bringing the issues in and finding out more about the person and their beliefs and presenting Islam nicely to them. But you have to get some kind of opening line, some kind of icebreaker. So right now, all we talked about in the office so far is we just talked about icebreakers, and sometimes actions can be easy icebreakers. That's what I wanted you to take away, that sometimes doing something can be easier than saying something as an icebreaker. So as an icebreaker, just, start praying near to where they are, or let them see you praying instead of going hiding in a corner room or something like that. These actions can sometimes be easier to break the ice than the necessarily, sort of going and speaking to somebody. That can be something that you can follow up with later. Some people might ask about literature as an icebreaker. Literature's okay as a catch-all, meaning that you leave literature in your workplace if you're allowed. Of course, one of the things we have to bear in mind about Dawah is we have to follow the rules. We have to, we can't do anything that would break the law, and we can't do anything that would upset the company or whatever. But if they allow you to leave literature in the room where the staff are all there, then why not leave the literature there? But when you leave the literature there, you need to make sure that the literature has a current phone number for the Islamic Center or something there, or if you're interested, speak to Muhammad on floor 3, but something has to be there, because otherwise someone might pick up the literature and really be interested in Islam and then not be able to follow it up. And that happens sometimes when your literature is from abroad. It might not be from here, and you give someone a leaflet and the number is wrong, or it's old, or the address is wrong. So it is really important to, if you do leave literature out as a catch-all, meaning that there'll be people you can't speak to, there'll be people that you won't have time or you won't meet them. So the literature is kind of there just to catch anyone that you didn't get a chance to speak to. But that is an option also. But what is probably not such a good idea is just giving out literature to people before speaking to them, if you can avoid it. Because what sometimes happens with that is you may give them something that doesn't fit who they are. and it's not the kind of thing that they might be interested in. So it might also set people on the defensive of, oh, okay, you know, what is this? So it might be better with literature just to leave it in a place that's accessible for people to pick up, and then give it as the second stage, as the stage when maybe people are more interested and there's some traction there, and say, I'd love to give you a leaflet about it. If you would be interested, of course, and you can give them a leaflet about it. That can be more helpful, but you have to build some kind of traction in order to get them going. So we just talked so far about icebreakers in the office. How do you get that first contact going? And there's no doubt it's easier for some people than others. Some people have that kind of nature that they find it easy to approach topics, and some find it difficult. But it's really useful, if you find it difficult, to spend time with people who don't, because that will help you a lot when you're spending time with people who are giving dawah. Even if it's just, you know, you have a half a day with someone who goes to a lot of places and gives dawah, you can learn a lot from them, and you can get some ideas about just how to approach the topic in the workplace. Now, the workplace for approaching the topic is easier than some other places, because you're likely to see people many times over. So it's quite easy to build a relationship with them over a fairly long period of time, because generally you see people in the workplace regularly, the same people over and over again. It's harder for the icebreaker on the street, because on the street you have no connection to that person, and the chances are you're never going to see that person again. Whereas with the workplace, you have a little more time to think about it. So now you're at the workplace, and you've got past the icebreaker, and you've got them to talk a little bit about religion. Very quickly, you need to try and find out what it is that they believe. Now, if your time is extremely limited, you may want to present La ilaha illallah first of all, as a concept and an idea, and then go into what they believe if you think you're not going to have time. Because one of the worst feelings is when you start a conversation and the only thing you found out is that the guy is a Buddhist, and that's it. He left. So you never really got a chance to get the message over to that person. So instead, you may want, if your time is limited, if you have a regular time with the person, it may be better for you to first of all find out a little bit about them, and then to approach the issue of Islam and explaining Islam to them. But if you feel your time might be limited, then what I would suggest is that an initial presentation of La ilaha illallah. Just a very simple, like, you know, for example, you say to somebody, you started with something about Islam. You said, do you know what Islam is about? So you've broken the ice, and then your next question is, do you know much about Islam? And then, well, I mean, there's a lot of Muslims here in Dubai. So yeah, but have you ever wondered what Muslims really believe? Not what they show on the TV, but like, what do Muslims really believe? No, I said, and they, you know, it just started like that, and then you say, well, Islam is all about worshipping one God. So if we look in the world today, people worship many, many things. I mean, people worship money, people worship themselves, people worship statues and idols, but in Islam, it's all about worshipping one God and making the whole religion for Him. And that's what Islam is about. It's not about the beard or the hijab or anything, any of these sort of supplementary issues. The heart of Islam is worshipping one God and one God alone, and leaving everything that is worshipped besides God. You know, what do you think of that? And then now you've had a chance to present it, now you can start to ask them about themselves, like, do you believe in a religion? Then you can ask them a few more questions, you can get a bit more information about them, and you can start to tailor the message to them. Because now you know what they do. For example, if they're an atheist, more of your emphasis is going to be upon what it's going to be upon looking at, for example, the existence of God and the right of God to be worshipped. And maybe things relating to qadr, which is usually where atheists have issues. That's going to be the main focus. If the person is a Hindu, the main focus is going to be upon worshipping Allah alone, and what that really means practically. That means you can't worship statues and gods and objects, and maybe also into the concept that God is separate from His creation, if they have this sort of idea that God is one with His creation, or we're all God, or everything is a representation of God, and things like that. So this is where you can go from there. It's probably good to talk about right now, just while we're on this topic, the different types of people you might meet. Now, this is not an exhaustive list. I'm not going to give you an exhaustive list. but just to have a general idea, a general overview of these different religions. And it would be a good idea, this is where I do think it's beneficial to have a little bit of knowledge about what we call al-adyan wal-firaq, religions and the different sects within those religions. Very vaguely, you don't have to be an expert, but at least you should know roughly what Christians believe and what's roughly Protestant Christians, Catholic Christians, Orthodox Christians. Have a rough idea. You don't need to be an expert. I'm talking about a 5-minute, 10-minute overview of what they believe only. Just so that you have an idea of what it's likely, without presuming, because remember we said you're not going to presume that you know what the person believes. But just to have a general idea that when someone says, I am an Orthodox Christian, what is that likely to mean? Generally, as a whole, as a rule, what is that? Where am I going to go with that? What are the kind of things that I need to address? What is going to work better? So to have a general overview. So what are the different kinds of people that you can meet? Probably the most common of all of them that you're going to meet, probably if we're talking about Dubai, would obviously be Christians, Hindus, and probably realistically atheist agnostic. These are going to be among the most common. But there are many, many others. You will still find many others, and you should be aware of the others as well, because you may also see people in other environments of other religions. But probably one of the main sort of people you're going to meet in Dubai, going to meet a lot of Christians of many different types and denominations, a lot of Hindus, and also some Buddhists as well. You will get Buddhists as well in a smaller number, and you're also going to meet atheists and agnostics. So to have a good idea, and where is your prime resource for this? Try to speak to people who became Muslim from among those people. So I'm not going to sit here and tell you about the tenets of Hinduism, because we have people here in the room today who are reverts from Hinduism. They used to be Hindu and they became Muslim. Those guys know much, much better than me about what the tenets of the religion are and things like that, but getting some time with people who know about it and learning about it. So for me, I know more about Christianity, that's what I have more experience with, and also atheism, agnosticism, because we get a lot of that in the UK generally. The vast majority of people we're going to talk to would be Christian or atheist agnostic. So that would be what would be used to, and what would be sort of focusing on. Now with regard to the Christians, Jews and Christians, one of the advantages you have is you already have commonalities. And commonalities can be very valuable in da'wah, things that you both already agree upon. So that can be very, very valuable. Now don't presume, remember what I said about not presuming? Don't presume that you know that that person necessarily believes in these things. But as a rule, Christians will believe in God. They will believe in prophets. They will believe in scripture. And so on. They will believe in heaven and hell. They will believe in life after death. There are certain essential things, angels and so on, that Christians are going to believe in. So these are commonalities, things where we may not, our belief in the angels is not like their belief in the angels. And our belief in the prophets is not like their belief in the prophets. But at least there is something there that we can build upon. And often you can actually address that in your da'wah and talk about the fact that if that is a conversation, the person says that, maybe for example, if you see somebody wearing a cross, this is a perfect question to ask. You see somebody, it's an excellent icebreaker. You see the person and they're wearing on their neck a cross. You say, do you mind if I ask you a question? You say, sure, go ahead. You say, is that a cross you wear? You say, yeah. You say, why is that? Is it a religious thing? Or you can play a little bit, along with it, even if you think you might know why it is. It doesn't hurt to ask them, is that a religious thing, or is it just? Say, yeah, I'm a Christian. Okay, so now we can ask, do you mind if I ask you some things about it? I mean, I love talking about religion, and I like to tell people about my religion. I like to hear about other people's religion, if you don't mind. And that can be your icebreaker, where you can get in now to the topic, and you can quickly present Islam, because really you don't really want to hear a great deal about Christianity at all. What you just want to hear is enough about what they believe to know how to address it with them, and then to present the religion of Islam to them. So Christians, you're going to have some commonalities, and you can use that. You can say that, as I understand it, Christians believe in the prophets, including Jesus, peace be upon him. Is that true? If I say, yeah, I believe in Jesus, I believe in Abraham, I believe in Noah. Say, wow, so do, as Muslims, we also believe. But as Muslims, we believe that all of them worshipped one God and one God alone, and that God doesn't have any son or any partner. So you see how you took something there and you brought it back to Tawheed, to La ilaha illallah. You didn't let the conversation go aside into, yeah, we believe in Noah, we believe in Noah, we believe in Abraham, we believe in Abraham. You brought it back quickly onto the main topic. But the difference is that we believe that there is one God and one God alone. And what I'll often use with Jews and Christians, one of the things I personally like to use, is I like to use the 10 Commandments. This is my go-to thing with Jews and Christians. I say, you guys believe in 10 Commandments, right? The 10 Commandments that were given to Moses. Jews and Christians both believe in them. The only ever one that I memorize is the first one. Hear, O Israel, that your God is one God, you have no God other than him. This is the first commandment. In different forms, 1a, 1b, whatever, the different Bibles and the different wordings, but that's the context of it. Hear, O Israel, that your God is one God, you have no God except him. And I say, you know what we call this in Arabic? La ilaha illallah. And we believe this is the message that was the first message given to every single prophet, not just Moses, but it was the first commandment given to every prophet, that there is no God that should be worshipped besides Allah, besides God alone. On that topic, the topic of Allah, you may want to clarify and try to avoid using Arabic words, but when you use them, explain them. Because don't presume the person knows what it is. Some people honestly believe that Allah is the moon. Some people think that Allah is the black box in Makkah. Some people think that's where Allah lives. Ta'ala Allah amma yakulun. Haya is Allah above what they say. But people are confused. People tend to see you the way they are. So very, very common to find Hindus who believe that Allah is a kind of an idol. Why? Because they put Allah in the way that they understand their gods. Very common for Christians, when you talk about Allah, to personify, like as an old man with a grey beard in heaven with striking lightning. Ta'ala Allah amma yakulun. High is Allah above what they attribute to him. But they put Allah in their minds in the way that they think about God themselves. So it's very important, you might want to clarify. See, you probably heard Muslims always saying this, Allah, Allah, Allahu Akbar, all that stuff. Do you know what the word means? It actually means the one true God who deserves to be worshipped. He's not human, he doesn't have any human form. He's completely different from his creation. And we worship him alone, and we don't make any partner with him. And you've given the message, even if that person doesn't listen to you at all after that, you've given the message. At least you've given the core of that message. Now, having said that, of course you don't just want to get in that, you want to also get in the prophethood of the Messenger Muhammad ﷺ, because at the end of the day, La ilaha illallah comes with Muhammadur Rasulullah. But even just to get that La ilaha illallah, to have got that in there, that's beautiful. We believe that Almighty God sent prophets. And He sent prophets throughout time, and it's great if you're talking to a Christian because they already believe in many of those prophets. You know, you heard about Noah, you've heard about Abraham, you've heard about Moses, Jesus, peace be upon him, who we believe is a prophet and not a son of God. There you go, you get La ilaha illallah in there again. And again, now we're looking for just the conclusion, and that Muhammad, peace be upon him, is the final messenger of God. And again, you need to give a bit of information with that. You want to talk a little bit about who he was, but sometimes your time is short. At least if you get La ilaha illallah in there, you've got the main message. If you can bring in prophethood and the prophethood of Muhammad ﷺ, then alhamdulillah, you've got the complete shahada in there now. And then if you can elaborate on that and answer their questions, that's excellent. So that deals a little bit with the Christians. With Christians, take advantage of the fact that there are some things that you both believe. But be careful. This has a double-edged sword. It can also lead to them believing that there's no difference between Islam and Christianity. So don't emphasize the similarities without emphasizing the differences. This is very important. This is a qaida when it comes to dealing with people who have similar beliefs to you. Don't just emphasize the similarities, you have to also emphasize the differences. Otherwise they say, yeah, I knew that Christianity and Islam are just the same thing. Just Islam has Arabic words and Christianity has Greek words or Hebrew words or English words. You've got to explain the difference, not just the similarity. Otherwise you're going to get nowhere fast. So it's really important to do that. With regard to the atheist, this is the hardest one. Because you have nothing at all in common. No belief in God, no belief in prophethood, no belief in scripture. You basically are down to human values. That's the only thing that you're going to have in common. Human values like be nice to people and don't kill and don't steal and things like that. But what it helps to do with atheists is it really helps for you to understand the core reasons behind atheism. So the first thing I'm going to tell you is that atheism is an emotional belief and it is not a rational one. Wallahi, this is something that some people find this hard to swallow a little bit. Yeah, this is a bit much for some people. But wallahi, atheism is a purely emotional reaction and it is not a rational one. They make an emotional reaction and then they try to justify it with rationality. So you get lots of atheists bringing you rationality and science and all this type of stuff. But the driving factor behind atheism is emotional, not rational. And the evidence for that is that atheism goes completely against the fitrah. It goes against everyone's inner nature and it goes against everything that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has taught you in terms of your intellect, your mind and your logic. It doesn't make any sense scientifically, logically, in any way. In fact, to the point that arguing that God doesn't exist is harder than arguing that there is no sun in the sky. Like you're asking somebody that, in fact, to even argue, some of the scholars even said, to even argue God's existence is taking away from God's honor, because He is greater than the fact that you need to even argue that He exists. Subhanallah. So this is the thing, that you understand that atheism is an emotional reaction. And you have to get back to the emotion of it, as well as because they cover it in rationality and science, but ultimately, why didn't God guide me? Why has God made bad things happen to me? Why am I miserable? That's the reason the people are atheists. It is emotional, it's not rational. They're not atheists because they genuinely believe that you mutated from an ape. That is not a rational belief. It's not scientific, it's not rational, it doesn't make any sense, and it's not supported by modern science at all. All it is they want to know that when they were little and they didn't get the toy that they wanted, why didn't God give it to them? It's an emotional reaction. And that's why you've got to get down to the emotion of it. They will cover it with so much science and rationality and logic and problem solving, but when you get down to the middle, it's about the fact, the heart. And it's usually something related to qadr. Usually. To qadr, including guidance, misguidance, why does evil happen? They can't reconcile the world that they live in with the concept of God. It can also come from another thing, which it can come from a confusion about who God is. Because if they've had the Christian version of God, the Christian version of God is either a human being walking around on the earth with a long beard, or an old man up in heaven with a long beard. That's the concept of God in Christianity. It's no wonder the people turn away from God, because their whole idea of what God is imperfect and human, and their mind rejects that. And sometimes they can reject it so badly that they reject everything. And that's why you can even find that among misguided Muslims who have very deviant beliefs about Islam and very strange ideas about Islam, that they've been brought up in a country that teaches them very flawed beliefs about Islam, is that many of them turn to atheism because they can't reconcile Islam, which they've been taught, the corrupt and confused and deviant Islam they've been taught. They can't reconcile that with their heart and their intellect, and so they reject everything. So sometimes you can find that problem. So atheism requires a bit of probing. It requires a bit of, you have to walk a little bit slowly around it. until you really get to the core of the issue. And sometimes you can ask a question like, I honestly can't understand why anyone wouldn't believe in God. So then, sometimes the problem is that they keep throwing those, those sort of semi-rational type things out at you. I think we've gone past that, science has gone. But ultimately you're going to get, at the end of the day, when you boil it down, you're going to get to an emotional argument. You're going to get to something emotional, something like, why did God do this to me? Why did this happen to me? Why did my child suffer? Why did my parents do this? Why did this happen? It's very much on these topics. And for that research, I did some research on this, in which we watched a number of interviews with atheists from around the world. It's a very common factor with atheists. Qadr and pride also. Pride in terms of, if God existed, He would have guided me. That's a very common argument you hear from atheists. If God existed, He would have guided me. And you have to differentiate between the atheist and between the agnostic. The atheist is the one who firmly rejects God. I've looked at the issue and I don't believe in God. And the agnostic is the one who says, I don't know, I just don't know. I don't know whether God exists, maybe, maybe not. I've not really thought about it. That person is a much more open. You can go straight into dawah with them, straight into, let me talk to you about God and who God is, and then you tell me if you think God exists. So you can go into it like that. But with the atheist, you've got an instant barrier. So what I tend to do with atheists, I take it very slowly. Especially if they are very aggressive atheists, meaning that they really believe very firmly in what they hold. I take it very slowly with them. I ask them if it's okay. I said, would you mind if we discuss the issue? Would you object if we could have a little discussion about it? And often, out of manners, they'll say, of course we can have a discussion about it. Say, okay, I tend to have them a lot of times by email. Often by email. Because I think with those guys, just to compose an answer and pass it over to them, I find for me it works better. Because otherwise I find the conversation tends to be just like ping pong, it's just like very quickly back and forward. For me it doesn't work. So I personally, with people who say they're atheist, I'll often say like, can we start a little discussion maybe, just a little WhatsApp thing or something? I can just message you some of the questions I thought about, and you can tell me also what you think, or what made you come to that conclusion. And often atheists have a bit of an inflated sense of their own, knowledge also. So they may actually welcome that. A lot of them will welcome it. Yeah, of course you poor person who still believes in this backward idea of God, of course I'll talk to you about it. So take advantage. If they want to talk to you about it, by all means, now use it for your da'wah. It does help to look at the resources that exist about atheism. There are some excellent people giving da'wah online who do some really amazing work on atheism. There are some great books, but do be careful about something. Don't, because the person is atheist, don't feel that you have to abandon your normal way of explaining Islam and you have to go back to logic and science. That's not the case. In fact, if you go back to logic and science, you will lose. And that's not because the truth is not with you. But that's because you made the arena that you're discussing their arena. You made the distinguishing factor between truth and falsehood science. That's very problematic, because it only takes a scientist to come along and say, I'm a scientist and I don't believe in what you said. Now you're stuck because you made the judgment of right and wrong science. Whereas if you were to come on the topic of fitrah, the signs of Allah in the universe, and revelation and prophethood, these are how we talk to people who are atheists. Through these principles. Not through logic. Not through everything must have a beginning, and every beginning must have an origin, and the origin must have a single first origin, and the first origin must... this logical argument falls down badly. And anyone who has a bit of experience will pull you apart with it. The way you discuss with an atheist is you talk about the fact that the existence of God and the desire to worship Him is a fundamental human characteristic. That's what we call fitrah. That fitrah alone is not enough for a person to be guided towards worshipping God. Although you're inclined, that's why every human being all around the world, everyone is inclined to worship God. That's why you don't see a single community anywhere in the world except that they have some sort of place of worship for God. You talk about the signs of God in the universe. How did this universe come into being? How did we end up with all of this perfection and all of these signs, and the night and the day and the sun and the moon, everything in perfect order? And sometimes you can use what we call dalilun shar'iyyun aqli. This is important. I asked this question to Shaykh Abdul Razzaq al-Abbad, hafidhahullah, because I wanted to ask the Shaykh, if we're not supposed to use pure logic with them, what can we use instead of logic? If we're not going to use, and by pure logic I mean philosophical logic, like philosophy, if we can't use that sort of philosophical argument with them, what can we use? So the Shaykh, he said, you need to use al-adillatu al-shar'iyyatu al-aqliyah, the Islamic evidences from the Quran that address logic. For example, أَمْ خُلِقُوا مِنْ غَيْرِ شَيْءٍ أَمْ هُمُ الْخَالِقُونَ أَمْ خَلَقُوا السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ بَلْ لَا يُوقِنُونَ. This ayah is dalilun shar'iyyun aqli. It's an evidence that is Islamic, but it also is addressing a logical concept. Were they created from nothing, or did they create themselves? Or did they create the heavens and the earth? Rather, they are not certain. And this last bit is very important, they are not certain. And that is the reality. Everything that someone has put out as a theory for how it is that we can explain the universe without God, every single one of them has just brought mujarrad dhann, only ideas and opinions and theories. أَمْ خُلِقُوا مِنْ غَيْرِ شَيْءٍ. Were you created from nothing? If you say you were created from nothing, by your own scientific principles, that you can't create matter and destroy it, you can only convert it from one form to another. أَمْ خُلِقُوا مِنْ غَيْرِ شَيْءٍ. Were they created from nothing? أَمْ هُمُ الْخَالِقُونَ. Or did you create yourselves? أَمْ خَلَقُوا السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ. Or did you create the heavens and the earth? Now they have answers that they will bring here. But what you can say to every one of these answers, بَلْ لَا يُوقِنُونَ. They don't have any certainty. You're not sure about it. You have an idea, you have a theory, maybe in the future. And that's why, if you talk to people about atheism generally, there's a lot of future hopes in there. In the future, science will explain to us where the universe came from. Habib, I don't want the future, I want now. Tell me now. I'm not bothered about in 200 years, science is going to explain to me why God doesn't exist. Now, you explain to me. بَلْ لَا يُوقِنُونَ. They don't have certainty, they do not know. They just have a guess, and that guess is very vague about, well, it might have been that we came from this, and it might have been this, and it might be that there are multiple times, it might be this, and it might be that, and it might be, it's all about might be. But there's nothing certain. So you talk about the ayat of Allah Azza wa Jal, and you talk about revelation, and this is where you emphasize it the most, because the one thing that the atheists can't argue with, they can argue with you on the fitrah. They can say, my fitrah is not to worship Allah alone. They can argue with you on the topic of the signs of Allah in the universe, and say it all came about by random, even though that is the most illogical thing in the entire world. For example, we say to them, the simple example of the monkey, you give a monkey a bag of Scrabble tiles, and you tell the monkey to throw the tiles backwards. How long before the monkey will throw the entire Encyclopedia Britannica from beginning to end without making a mistake? This is never going to happen. What you are suggesting to me, that the universe came about by random, is infinitely more complex than what I suggested to you, and you told me it was impossible. But anyway, the one that they can't argue with, and they can't dispute with you, is revelation. So you say, I have a proof that God exists, and a proof that you can't deny, it can't be denied. And it's a proof that doesn't require you to calculate and theorize and guess. It's a proof that is ilm yaqeen, certainty, and it is the revelation. And then you tell them about the revelation, and you tell them about prophethood, and you show them the Quran. This is how we deal with atheism. Don't deal with it like them on science and logic and whatever, because you're going to end up losing the argument. Instead, talk to them about prophethood and revelation as the ultimate proof that God exists. Because there you can't go wrong. And there they don't have anything to argue with logic against you, or science against you, or the theory of this or the theory of that. You have an indisputable proof, which is the book of Allah Azza wa Jal, and the revelation. So use it, inshallah. And one of the issues, I'm not going to talk, like I said, I'm not going to talk too much about Hinduism, but one of the things I have experienced with Hinduism a lot is the issue that all religions are true. Now, not all Hindus believe this, but a lot of Hindus, when you push them on their religion, the answer they'll give back to you is, all of the roads lead to God. Islam leads to God, Christianity leads to God, Hinduism leads to God, Buddhism leads to God, atheism leads to God. One brother gave a very nice answer to this. This is why you should try and, take answers from people. But it's a very, very nice answer. It's not the only answer, but just to show you sometimes how you can explain to people. The brother, he said, there are many, because the person gave an example. The person said, just like there are many roads that lead to this office building, there are many roads that lead to God. That's what the person who was a Hindu, he said, just like there are many roads that lead to this office building, there are many roads that lead to God. Brother gave a very nice answer. He said, what do you think if the ruler of Dubai closed all the roads except one? Which road will you use? He said, well, I'll use the road that he left open. He said, okay, the ruler of the heavens and the earth closed all the roads to paradise except one. So you have no road except this. This is a nice, subhanAllah, beautiful answer to a person who gives you this idea. But the more kind of detailed answer is to say to them, if all of those religions called to the same thing, then we could say that they all lead to the same thing. But in reality, they all call to completely different concepts of God and completely different commands from beginning to end. And when you show them that, like show them the difference between Islam and between other religions. It's not about attacking that religion, but about showing them the difference. So in Islam, we dedicate all of our worship to God alone. How can it be that dedicating your worship to God alone is the same as putting your worship of God through a statue or an animal? How can those two things be the same? One person worships the creator of the heavens and the earth, and the other one worships a cow or a monkey or a statue. How can those two be the same? How can you say that they are both roads that lead to the same thing when they are so fundamentally and completely different? And again, your job is to give the message of Islam clearly and concisely. If you feel out of your depth with the person's religious beliefs, it may help for you to this point to go and get knowledge about a little bit about what they believe. So try and get as much information out of them as you can, and then go to one of the reverts who's come from that religion, or watch a video about it and just get some understanding of it so that you have a little bit of preparation on how to be able to answer. And ultimately, if you feel really stuck, and I still do this today, is if I feel really out of my depth with someone, talking about a religion that is not a religion I know much about, I will actually hand that person over to a Daiee that specializes in that religion. And this happened to me recently. We had a brother who was a Sikh, he was a Sikh gentleman, he wanted to embrace Islam. And I did talk to him. I do know a little bit about Sikhism. I did talk to him about it, but I felt like he was bringing quotes and he was bringing religious principles that I didn't feel comfortable with. So my first question was, pick up the phone, Islamic Information Center or one of the other Islamic centers, can you guys help me by finding me somebody who reverted to Islam from Sikhism? Because now I need somebody who can take this over, who can bring a personal touch and some experience to the table, because I feel like I'm out of my depth answering this person in the questions that they have. So that deals a little bit about the different religions that you might get. Don't be frightened, and I want to say this really clearly, don't be frightened to hand over to one of the du'at or one of the Islamic centers. We're all learning. I myself do it. I myself hand over to people when I feel that I'm not helping. But again, it's a judgment call. You may feel for you to get the information and explain it to the person would keep the personal relationship going. You feel it's better for you. But sometimes you feel like, look, I'm not doing this very well. I think I need to bring this person to someone more knowledgeable. Now you've broken the ice, you've had a little discussion, they've raised some questions, you couldn't answer them, you got the research, you brought it back, but they brought other things. So now you need to take them to somebody who might be able to answer their questions better. In this, when you do it, there's a way to do it. First of all, definitely seek their permission before doing it. You want to ask the person that, if it's okay, I just feel out of my depth answering some of these questions, and I feel like I'm not giving you the right Islamic answers. Could we go to somebody who knows a little bit more about it? If I were to invite you to come over for a meal, and maybe invite them, and we could talk about it more, I feel it would be better and I feel maybe I don't want to misrepresent Islam. So that's one option you have. Also, seek permission from the person you're going to go to. Because it's always difficult for me, I always find it very, very difficult for me when someone brings me someone like that and I don't know anything about the case. Because now I don't know, remember how we said about knowing the person you're giving da'wah to? I don't know the person now, and I don't know what they believe. So now the whole meeting I have to spend finding out what they believe. Whereas if that person came to me beforehand and said, I'm going to bring this brother from the office tomorrow, he's an atheist, he says he doesn't believe in any God, he says that the reason he doesn't believe in God is because there are so many bad things that happen in the world, that how can there be a loving God when there are so many bad things that happen in the world, and he's also said to me that he believes in evolution and science. This now I can prepare, I can be ready for it when he comes, that inshallah I have the relevant answers ready, and maybe I have some material, some leaflets, literature, I have that available inshallah. Use the literature yourself as well. Once you've broken the ice and you've had a little conversation, don't be frightened to go and pick up the excellent leaflets. The Islamic Information Center leaflets are amazing with sort of the different ones, but rather than just collecting everything, try and look for 2 or 3 that you think really, capture what that person needs right now. So you're not going to burden them with, here's some information about Islam. Instead, here's some information about Islam. One God. Okay, worship Him. Okay, I get it. What do Muslims think about Jesus? Perfect. That in itself will be more than enough. Then you yourself can ask them, did you read it? What did you think about it? Do you have any questions for me? Is there anything you'd like to ask? How about we go to one of these, and again, you can keep on with your job. You can keep on. And if you're doing this right, you should have many people going at the same time, because you're speaking to everybody. So you've got one person over there, one person over here, and you're just sort of, each one is at a different stage, and you're just trying to pull them there. When doing that, the last point I'm going to mention about the workplace before we go on to a couple of other points about the workplace is the importance of closing the deal. Some of you work in sales, you know this better than me, right? If you work in sales, you know better than me about the importance of closing the deal. Some customers you have, they just keep looking at that car all day. I think I want to buy it. It's a nice car. It's a good price. I'll come back tomorrow. Tomorrow he comes in, he's like, it's a nice car, it's a good price. I think about next week. And you have to close the deal. You have to get the signature on the paper. And subhanAllah, don't be frightened to learn some of the techniques people use. They are techniques that are beneficial. I'm not going to say that don't use a technique that will contradict what Islam tells you, no way. But there are some things that help. Like, for example, creating a sense of urgency. They say one of the ways you close a deal is you create a sense of urgency. That's why these shops have on the sign like, offer ends tomorrow. Because they're creating a sense of urgency. I need to get this today because it might not be until stocks last. And you know that they've got like 10 million of them. But you're looking and thinking, oh, what will happen if I come next week and the product's not there anymore? I have to buy it. This is what they call creating a sense of urgency. And this is something the Quran does and the Sunnah does with regard to da'wah. Because the Quran and the Sunnah tell us that you might die tomorrow. You might die the next day. This is urgency now. You don't have next week to accept Islam. Because if you die, there's no more choice. So it's not, you don't have to use those words, but you need to make a little bit of urgency in there, especially when you see the person is dawdling, just sitting on I want to learn more, I want to think more. This is very common. We get people will say, I like what you said, but I want to learn everything about Islam before I become a Muslim. So this actually, the person is trying to tell you something. They're trying to tell you that they're worried that they might find something in Islam they can't do. That's what they're really trying to tell you. So what we tend to say to them is put them at ease and say to them, look, if you believe that Islam is the truth, and you believe that only God has the right to be worshipped, and nobody has the right to be worshipped but Him, and you believe that Muhammad, peace be upon him, is the messenger of God, and you believe in the things that I've explained to you about Islam, accept Islam today. And notice how one of the ways you can create urgency is invite them, ud'u, invite them, don't just leave it like that. Accept Islam today. Accept Islam today. And then you can learn slowly, and don't worry if you find things you're struggling with. You can take your time, but you can learn slowly, and you can implement. As you learn something new, you can put it into practice. But if you believe Islam is the truth, you owe it to yourself to accept Islam today. Because I don't know if you're going to be here tomorrow. Created a sense of urgency in an Islamic way that didn't contradict the Quran and the Sunnah, but you put some urgency into it, and you try to close the deal. Sometimes being personal, you know, some of the people said, you know, call them by their name. You know, sort of say, make it personal, don't make it like, I'm inviting everyone in the room to become Muslim. You know, John, I'm inviting you to become a Muslim. Well, that makes a difference. People feel like, me? You know, because sometimes some people will not accept Islam because they're waiting for a personal invitation. Now, they don't feel like that, but that's psychologically what's going on in their mind. They're waiting for a personal invitation. They feel like, oh, he's not talking to me, I couldn't be one of those people. When you say, John, why don't you become a Muslim? John, I'm inviting you, I'm calling you to become a Muslim. With a nice smiley face, not like, I'm calling you to become a Muslim, and if you don't become a Muslim, something really bad is going to happen tomorrow. You know, but in a nice smile, like, John, I'm inviting you to become a Muslim today. Well, I came today to invite you to become a Muslim. And if he says, no problem, but you can work on it, but you created some urgency and you gave a reason, you called them to do it. So this is something that is important. Sometimes you get stuck. What do you do when you feel like you're just going round and round and round in circles? There are certain questions you can ask that really have a very high value. So one of the ones I use with people that are dawdling and I just can't get anything out of them, it's really simple. Just ask them, can I ask you a question? Do you mind if I ask you a question? What's stopping you from becoming a Muslim? That's a very good question. Because instead of saying, you know, Islam, tell me what's stopping you. And sometimes the person will say, well, nothing really. That might be the truth, it might be a lie, it might be there is something but you haven't got it out. But it might be that they really haven't thought there's nothing really. So if there's nothing, then why don't you become a Muslim? I'm inviting you to become a Muslim today. See what they say. Or it may be they say, well, you know what, it's just one thing. It's the ... And now they're going to bring a particular issue they have, which might be one of a misconception, something in the news. Sometimes you can guess it. I don't like guessing it, but sometimes if you feel that the person is skirting around an issue, like for example, if we're talking about things like violence in the name of Islam, terrorism and things like that, often people won't raise it with you because they're just embarrassed to say it, you know. But you can feel them skirting around the issue. It's just there's some things in Islam that just, they don't feel right to me. So give me an example. You know, I mean, I've read some things in the news, I've saw some things on the TV, and you think, okay, now I get what, you're just shy to talk about it. You say like, are you talking about these, you know, sort of these things that we see going on around the world and people do them in the name of Islam? And then you can explain to people that Islam has nothing to do with that, and you can give them the evidences and so on. But usually you can just get them to tell you. You just have to ask them, what's stopping you from becoming a Muslim? So you know what, it is nothing but my family. I'm just worried about what my family's going to say. So you don't ridicule it. You don't tell them, oh, your family, they're going to be fine, we'll all celebrate, they'll probably all become Muslim the next day. Because at the end of the day, it's not truthful. Didn't we say the characteristic of the Daiee is to be truthful? Say, look, some people do have difficulty with their families, but if you like, I can introduce you to some people who've become Muslim and you can see how they told their families. Again, letting them see people like them is really, really beneficial. Let them see people who are like them. But just be careful that you are really aware of who's like who. Like sometimes we can be a bit insular in that way, and we might not realize that the two people might come from the same country, but they might be from a totally different tribe or caste or social level or whatever, and you might introduce them to each other, and then one of them might get really offended that, look, you thought this person is like me? Do you know, like I'm on this level and they're on, you know, so you have to be a little bit wise about it. But yeah, you try to introduce someone to someone who is like them. You may not want to make it a big da'wah thing, you may want to make it something quiet and unofficial. In which case you may say that, like, oh, I'm going out with a friend of mine, would you like to join us? And the friend that you are going out with happens to be a revert Muslim who is similar to that person. This is also a tip that I would give you, and don't worry, the other ones won't take so long, but this is also a tip I would give you. If you personally feel that you cannot give da'wah to this person, then at least at a minimum level you have to hand that person over to someone who will. So you feel, look, I've been trying to give da'wah to this person, but maybe, for example, she's a lady and I'm a guy, and I just feel that it's not, you know, like I just can't give da'wah to her like that. It's not going to work. It's too, like, just the relationship isn't, it's not the right, we're talking and it's just not working. I just feel like it's leading to haram, it's not leading to something good. But if you're going to leave that person, you can't leave them with no guidance. Now you need to bring someone who is going to give da'wah to them. So you need to go find somebody. You need to go say, right, I need a sister who's going to give da'wah to her. How can I organize this? How can I arrange it? Is there someone in my workplace? If not, how could I bring someone? How can I get someone involved? Because ultimately you can't just leave the person. But there are some people it doesn't work with. There are some people you just don't get on with. You know, I want to give da'wah to this guy, but he hates my guts, so what can I do? You know, he doesn't like me. And we fight with each other. Obviously your character, you're trying to win him over, but sometimes you just have to hand it over to someone else. But don't leave that person. Hand it over to the person who is going to be able to convey the message of Islam to them. So that just talked about just general, and I talked about in the workplace. But it's a couple of different situations that were mentioned. Close to the workplace, the neighbors. The reason why neighbors are close to the workplace is because neighbors are also people you see regularly. So you have a lot of chance to build up a rapport with them. So the first thing you have to do, again, like we said in the office, you've got to speak to your neighbors. You have to speak to them. There's no good meeting them at the lift and you turn away and pick up your phone, and that's never going to get them anywhere. You know, you have to speak to them. And try, you know, giving gifts, giving food. You know, even in the office you can do the same thing. Bring some food in and hand it out to everyone. You just say, you know, but you know, don't give some like weird justification like, oh, I'm celebrating something you're not allowed to celebrate, like I'm celebrating my birthday or something like that. And you have to give an Islamic explanation. That Islam tells us to be good to people, and I wanted to do a good deed for people today. So I wanted to give you something and then going to explain about what Islam is. But with neighbors, sending food over, Ramadan is perfect for this. But don't just only do it in Ramadan, but Ramadan is perfect. Send your non-Muslim neighbors iftar. Invite your non-Muslim neighbors to have iftar with you. But when you do that, just make sure you put people at ease. Sometimes people are scared, like, what's he going to ask me to do? You know, like, what's an iftar? And they're Googling, you know, what's an iftar and what do I have to do about it? Okay, in Dubai probably it doesn't happen because people know about the iftar and things like that. But it can happen in other countries. So put them at ease. We're just going to have some food together. And that's it. But you make sure you've got a plan. I'm going to pray at that time. I'm going to go to the masjid and come back. The adhan's going to go up. Like, whatever it is that you can introduce Islam to them with. But you invite them around for some food. You give some food to them. And you speak to them. You know, and speak to them not only about religion for the neighbors, but also about the things that the neighbors have rights over you in. Like to ask them how they are, to ask them if everything is okay, to ask them if they need anything. You could just simply say like, oh, I'm your neighbor, we haven't met before, but if you need anything, you know where I am. Feel free to give me a knock anytime you need something. You know, in Islam, we're always told to be good to our neighbors. That's what Islam is all about. Worshipping one God alone, and not making any partner with Him. And of course, in following the messages and the prophets, we learn to be good to our neighbors and to kind to those. And so you try your best, you know, like at the end of the day, it's not about copying my words, it's about the ideas. And when you put them into practice, you'll find they flow off your tongue much easier than they flow off mine, inshallah. What about something totally different? So, actually a related question we had. before we go on to that, is what about women and da'wah? Women have a huge role to play in da'wah, especially because there are a whole bunch of women who need da'wah. So they have a big role to play in da'wah. And don't let the ladies think that the role for da'wah is the man's role. No, you have a huge role. The women, they have a huge role to play. But no doubt we have to keep our Islamic etiquettes. We don't want a lady to go outside of her Islamic etiquettes in order to convey Islam to people, right? That wouldn't make any sense. So we don't want her to be, for example, let's say a man touching a lady or a lady touching a man who is not mahram and so on, in order to convey Islam to them. That doesn't make sense. Because how can you convey Islam to someone by doing something which is haram? So it's important to do things the right way. But as long as she does it the right way, and she stays within the limits that Allah has set for her, and that's no different to the man, by the way, that's not unique to the women, the man also stays within the limits set to him, then women are, like the Prophet ﷺ said, shaqiqat al-rijal, they are the full sisters of men, meaning that the rules that apply to the men apply to the women, except when there's a clear exception. So in all honesty, there's plenty of opportunity, especially among the women, because as we know, we don't really want to have a situation, ideally, where men are giving da'wah to women and women are giving da'wah to men. Sometimes it might happen like that, like without you planning something, you talk to the person, it's not a problem. It happens sometimes like that. A lady might come up to me and say, can you tell me about Islam? You know, I say to her, I can't talk to you because you're a lady. But at the end of the day, I'm going to try to quickly, explain to her and convey to her and hopefully try and put her in touch with, and say maybe at the end of the conversation, you know what might be better? Would you like to talk to a Muslim lady who could help you more? Would that be more comfortable for you? Then, you can pass it on to somebody like that. So I mean, in that way, we all have a role to play. We all have a role to play. And no doubt, there may well be people in your own family who are not Muslim. Many of us have non-Muslim family members. And again, the women and the men both have a huge role to play in that. Again, with the women, some things that you would advise is, you have to understand that the hijab, and particularly if the lady, she wears niqab, she covers her face, that might be strange for some of the non-Muslims. So don't be frightened don't compromise it, don't be frightened to talk about it. Use it as a reason to talk about Islam. Sometimes people feel shy, they feel like lost, a bit like, you can see that they don't really know how to interact with you. So just explain it to them, and you can use anything as a talking point. Sometimes I come if I'm in the UK and I'm wearing my kandura, and sometimes someone will look at me really strangely, and I'll say to them, like, I guess you're wondering why I'm wearing these funny clothes, right? And then just talk to them about Islam. You can use anything as a reason, even the negative things. Like if someone's like, you see the sister is covered properly, and there's another lady talking to her, she doesn't really know what to do. She's like kind of confused. Talk to her about it. Say, look, I guess you're wondering why I'm dressed like this. And talk to her about it. Then talk to her about Islam and use it as a means to introduce the topic of Islam. But don't go off the topic, meaning don't go all onto the topic of hijab and all the other things and then leave the topic of worshipping Allah. So use that as an introduction to break the ice and bring you onto the topic of Islam. But I never feel bad and I never feel shy about using things about me, the way I look, the way I behave, things people might find strange. I'll use it as a way to break the ice easily. Because there's nothing easier to break the ice than making fun of yourself. And I don't mean making fun of the deen, you've got to distinguish, but like somebody say, I guess you're wondering why I'm dressed like this, I guess you're wondering why I have a beard, or someone often says to me, like, I had someone say to me, because now beards have become fashionable among men, and someone will say to me, oh wow, you've really made an effort growing that beard, like as in for fashion, and I'll say, oh, it's not for fashion, it's actually part of my religion, I'm a Muslim. Do you know what Muslims, I don't know if you've ever heard about what Muslims believe, and that's it, I'm going to get into it. So I'm not frightened to talk about the beard, about the thawb above the ankles, like sometimes people say to me, oh, you must be cold. Like, especially if you're in a country where it's cold, right, and you have your thawb above your ankles. It's like, oh, you must be cold. I say, no, I'm not, but do you wonder why I dress like this? Have you ever thought about asking anyone? And again, you're just smiling, you're approachable, and they feel comfortable, like, oh, you know, this is a person I can really talk to about the things that I'm thinking about, and they can introduce Islam to me. So another one that came up, which was very different, and then we're going to get into the scenarios you guys have in the Q&A. So things that people had very different is da'wah through social media. So da'wah through social media, no doubt social media is an incredibly powerful tool. But I'm going to give you a few points to stay safe on social media when giving da'wah. Number one, and this is the most important thing, it's the most important thing, make sure that what you convey on social media is the truth. Because so many people spread false ahadith, false things about Islam, things that are not true, people posting, you know, miracles, things that they're saying that are not even, they don't even exist in the Quran. So many things I've seen. Make sure what you post is true, because the greatest sin you can commit, وَأَن تَقُولُوا عَلَى اللَّهِ مَا لَا تَعْلَمُونَ, that you say about Allah what you don't know. So don't be a person who spreads false knowledge. If you want the right type of knowledge, again, make sure that, you know, try, it's difficult on social media, but try to target the right message to the right person. One of the problems we find with social media, wallah, I find this in myself, is I make a video, this video here. This video here was for you guys. I based what I said on this audience. Now what happens when this video here is posted on YouTube and a Christian watches it? And he says, you know, you people, you, Muhammad Tim, you are not nice about my religion. You are not, you know, you're not sincere. You are not, you said something, you know, so you've got to be careful about that aspect of social media. That sometimes you post something that's good for one person, but it's not really great for others. And it's difficult, but you try to balance it out, and you try to really think carefully about what it is you say, and be halim. You know, be a little bit slow, take it easy, think about what it is you're going to say before you say it. Don't rush into things, because social media is a very powerful tool, but if you say the wrong thing, it can reach a lot of people and give them the wrong impression of Islam. And there are some funny stories in that. Some of the du'at who, Jazakumullahu khairan, they said the truth, but sometimes the way that they said it, it got took out of context, and you have, you know, like these, like sort of messages going around, so-and-so says that Merry Christmas is worse than murder, and all of these kind of things going around, yani, that cause big problems for people, only because they said something true, but it was like kind of, you know, turned into a gif, or turned into a meme that just went to everybody. So you have to be a little bit careful about that. The next thing on social media is, if you're going to give da'wah through social media, be careful of your actions. Be careful you're not posting, this is me partying tonight, and then the next day, brothers, we have to fear Allah. You know, like, you got to be careful you're not giving mixed messages on social media. It happens. How many people, it happens, you know, the person is posting, you go through and it's like a mixture of haram and halal and everything. So be careful that you're giving a consistent message. And don't justify doing haram in the name of da'wah. You know, signing up that lady who has a very nice profile picture, it's not, wallah, don't tell yourself you're doing it for da'wah. Wallah, you're just lying to yourself, wallah. Don't lie to yourself. If you really wanted it for da'wah, pass her name and her handle or profile ID to one of the sisters and let her add them. Because wallahi, yani sometimes the shaitan comes to you and tries to take your ikhlas away. You see somebody with a nice profile picture and you say, look, I'm going to give this, who shall I give da'wah to? Eeny, meeny, miny. This one. Yeah, be careful, because you're telling yourself you're doing a big action that's going to get you Jannah, and in reality you're doing something that might put you in Jahannam. So don't mix up the two. If you're really going to be sincere, then sometimes you have to say, this person is not best for me. Sometimes people will contact you, and you might say, look, this person is not going to be good for me, but don't justify doing the haram. The reason I say this is because social media is very common. Yes, people do it in the workplace and other places. They'll say like, oh, I'm only meeting her for da'wah and things like that. But social media, it's very common that even really good people do things they would never ever do in public, and they justify it by saying this is da'wah or whatever. And make sure what you put on the videos and things like that, that it's sensible, it's wise, it's well, you know, well thought out, well spoken, because you've got to be a little bit careful about the image you present, because you're presenting a general image of Islam. And if in doubt, use material from reliable sources. Use people who share the videos of reliable people. And again, just be careful that what you're sharing is suitable for the audience that you are aiming for. No doubt on social media there are two types. There is the general interaction and there is the one-to-one. So a lot of social media is general. It's about it's like leaving literature on the table at work. You want to try and get as many people to see it as possible. But at the same time, sometimes you want to try still on that one-to-one thing of opening a direct conversation with someone and starting the conversation, especially if you, for example, you made a post and your post is a general post about Islam and a non-Muslim commented. That might be a perfect time to take that non-Muslim and DM them, or PM them, whatever, like direct message, personal message, and speak to them directly about Islam because they've commented, they've shown an interest in your posts. The only other one I wanted to deal with is dawah in public, just for 2-3 minutes. And when I say dawah in public, the first thing you need to make sure is it's really important that you comply with the law and the rules. Because wallah, we don't want to see the da'wah in Dubai or anywhere else get stopped or get reduced because people don't follow the rules. Okay, like here there are rules, right? We have the Daiee Islamiyya, the Islamic Affairs Department who regulate things. We just need to make sure we're doing things the right way. So usually what you want to make sure is if you're going to do something publicly, like that on the street, that you go with an Islamic center that knows what you can do and what you can't, because nobody wants to get to the stage where somebody does something and then they, the whole of the da'wah gets harmed in the sense that they say, okay, you can't do this activity anymore. So it's really important in any place you are, that wherever you are in the world, that you make sure that you're complying with all of the rules and regulations you have to do. Alhamdulillah, here in Dubai it's very easy. But generally, if you're going to do something big public, you really need to be careful about two things. If you're giving literature or leaving literature in places, make sure the literature is approved to be distributed. So the Islamic Information Center literature has approval. It has an approval number that this literature is approved. Because you don't want to be accused of approving or spreading literature that isn't approved. And if you're going to do any kind of public activity, you need to do it through an Islamic center. So that at least they can advise you what can be done, what not, and get permissions and everything. So you do it properly, inshallah. With regard to general public da'wah, I'm not talking about Dubai now, I'm talking about just generally. There are a couple of things. There are a couple of ways. One way is to set up some kind of focal point. So it could be a stall, it could be a tent, it could be a banner, something that draws people's attention, and then when people come to speak to you, you speak to them. That's something that it's very easy to do. So here, of course, you need permission for it, but we do it sometimes. You have, like in the different exhibition centers, you might have a little Islamic exhibition. Sometimes in the airport, in other places, there are like a little Islamic desk or a little Islamic exhibition. There's a focal point where people can be drawn into it. This way is easier, because the people who come to you, you put something there that is interesting and eye-catching and brings people, but people are coming to you at the end of the day. The hardest one, and this one I don't think it's easy to do here, but generally from maybe when you go back home, it's difficult, is the cold call, the cold approach, where you have to approach people at random. That's a little difficult. That tends to work better if you have some literature, and you maybe say to somebody, is it okay if I was to, can I hand you one of these? Is it okay if I can give you one of these? But again, just make sure that wherever you're doing that, you have the proper permissions. Even in the UK, you need it. You don't need Islamic permission, but you need like the local council, municipality permission to give out leaflets and things like that. So just make sure you do it, you don't break any rules, you do things properly wherever you are in the world. But yeah, that's one of the hardest ones, is the cold approach, where you have to approach somebody who doesn't want to talk to you. I personally minimize this. I don't do a lot of it. I'm not saying it's a bad approach, some people are good at it, but it's not an easy thing to approach people where the person in the first place doesn't want you to talk to them. It's quite a hard approach to make. If you do it, you've got to be very kind and very nice and very friendly and willing if people say to you, get lost. You've got to be like very, very, very approachable. It's very difficult to do. So you can say to somebody, okay, do you mind if I give you something, or I have a small gift for you? And make a real gift, not something just literature, like give them, I don't know, like a bottle of water with the Islamic Center's name written on it or something, Say, I have a gift for you. Please, by all means, take it. It has the number of our Islamic Center. If you'd like to find out more, the website is on there. Something like that. But it's very difficult, like approaching somebody who doesn't want to be approached. It's a tough one, because you have to disarm the fact that they don't want you to talk to them. So that is a little bit about that. Wallahi, those were some scenarios that we wrote down, we thought were important. And what I want to do now is, we have an hour left, roughly an hour. I want to hear from you guys. So either scenarios, and by scenarios I mean like this happened, like give me an example, somebody said this or somebody did this, or questions that you have. So the question could be that, what about this, or what should you do, or what if somebody said this to you? So I'm going to come to the commonly asked questions as well, but I think we'll deal with them through this inshallah, as well as I can. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take one from the brothers, one from the sisters. When I take one from the sisters, if one of the sister volunteers could choose the sister who's going to speak, because I'm not going to kind of go over there and point at somebody, inshallah. That would be good. Okay, from the brother's side. Come on.
How do you address the argument that, so when you bring the relation with atheists, they say it's a circular argument. Like they say, because you read the Quran, you believe in God. And because you believe in God, you read the Quran.
Okay, so this is a good question. So the atheist says to you that you read the Quran because you believe in God, and you believe in God because you read the Quran. In other words, it's a circular argument. So the first thing I would say to that is, I would say to them, well, as a person who doesn't believe in God, as you've told me that you don't believe in God, and you've told me that you're skeptical about that, why don't you read the Quran and see how you feel about it? I would take it through that angle, is to break the cycle completely and say, okay, you've said to me that because I believe in God, I read the Quran. Also, the other problem is that argument in itself doesn't really make a lot of sense, because one of them has to have come first. Like there has to have been a time when I had never read the Quran. Therefore, how could I have believed in God? Like there must have been a time when I believed before I had read the Quran, or I read the Quran before I had believed. The other thing to argue is that in of itself what they've said is not actually a bad thing. That I read the Quran and it increased me in faith in God, and when I got an increased faith in God, I wanted to read the Quran, because as Muslims we believe that faith increases and decreases. So those are three ways you could deal with it. But I would be tempted to just break the question, because it's an example of an atheist trying to deal with you on the logical level. I would just say to them, look, you're a person who doesn't believe in God, take this Quran and read it and see what you think. And bring me the questions you have, or bring me the concerns you have. That's what I would do, because it breaks that whole cycle. Sometimes you find yourself in da'wah, getting yourself in a destructive cycle, which means you get yourself into a backwards and forwards, it's just got no end to it. So it's try and break it, and remember, your job is to convey the message, not to make the person Muslim. You have to convey the message. If you can say you told that person, La ilaha illallah, Muhammadur Rasulullah, the basic idea of Islam, wallah, you've done your job. And the rest is not in your hands. So that's what I would say. Don't allow it to go around and around and around like that. Try and break it, inshallah.
For the sister side, they've sent them already over it.
Oh, they've sent paper. Excellent. Paper is even better. Perfect.
So I'll read the first one. This is basically saying that she's got a school friend who was once interested in knowing about Islam, and basically from the conversation said that she believed, and that she'd given her more books to refer to. And then after leaving school, she basically meets up with her every year, but now that same person who had said that she believed is basically saying that, how can I go against my family and become a Muslim? So she's saying, when I meet her every year, should I continue to keep telling about Islam? Because I feel a bit embarrassed of repeating the same thing, and she said, no, I'm not interested.
Okay, so yes, the answer is that the sister should continue to tell her friend about Islam, but should try to identify the problem. So when you're doing da'wah, you want to identify at what stage is the person at. So what we believe about this person is a person who at least claims to think that Islam is true. Now you have to analyze that. You have to kind of get to the bottom of that and find out if it's really the case that they really believe that Islam is true, but their problem is what their family would say. So again, a great question to ask is, What is stopping you from becoming Muslim? What's stopping me from becoming Muslim is how my family will react. My first answer to that is, don't tell them. Because in Islam, there is no need for you to tell your family immediately. In fact, the majority of the Sahaba, when you see the early days in Makkah, the Sahaba who became Muslim in Makkah didn't tell their families about it straight away. So say, look, it's not about telling your family, but it's about, again, create urgency. It's about the fact that what if you die tomorrow? How will you stand before God and tell God that you disbelieved in Him even though you knew that this message was the truth? So that's kind of where I would approach that one. But I would keep on going. I would just try and approach it from a fresh angle, so it's not the same conversation every year, and try and inject some urgency into it, inshallah. Okay, from the brothers, we will take the brother's question here. Wa alaikum salam.
So when you give Dawah, is it good idea to hand over a copy of Quran, and even though it's Arabic text, or only if it translated?
Okay, it's a very good question. Is it a good idea to hand over a copy of the Quran, and what about Arabic versus the translation? So, a couple of things here. The first 3 or 4 things I'll mention. The first thing is, I would not advise giving an Arabic copy of the Quran, or a copy that has Arabic in it, the full copy. I wouldn't advise giving it to most non-Muslims, because most of them would not give it its proper respect. As for giving parts of the Quran, like an ayah or 2, this is proven from the Sunnah, that the Prophet ﷺ wrote letters to non-Muslims and with parts of the Quran. But I would not give the whole Quran in Arabic. The other thing to note is, translations are not all the same. Please, 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 be extremely careful about the translation you give. Because some of them are written in Shakespearean English. Some of them are just plain wrong. The translations are very, very poor. Some of them will confuse them even more. Some of them are just, you've got to be very careful. My preference is one of 2. My strongest preference for giving to the non-Muslim is Sahih International. And they have a copy which is without the Arabic, and a lot of the Dawah centers have it. But if you can't find that, then Muhsin Khan, the official Saudi translation, is also good as well. But Sahih International, because it's easy to read. Muhsin Khan is hard to read. It's more accurate, but it's hard to read. Like you read, there's a lot of brackets, a lot of footnotes, a lot of like going off on the tangent, a lot of tafsir, a lot of explanation of meanings. So like it'll say al-bir, and then it'll say good piety, a good righteous action, and lots of other things, and then it's a little hard to read. So I would prefer Sahih International to give to the non-Muslim. But do be careful that you look through the material you give. Now, to answer your question also, would you give the Quran in the first place? I wouldn't just give a Quran to anyone and everyone. Even a translation, I wouldn't give it. I would save it for the person who really wants it. You know, I would say that in the first place, like prospects, right? It's like, I'm a salesman, I've got prospects, I've got potential people. One person isn't really interested. If I give him the Quran, I think it's probably just going to, you know, wal-i'adhu billah, it's just going to end up in the bin outside. Then there's a person who I really believe, you know, they've gone a bit further, I've given them a leaflet or 2, they were interested, and maybe they've asked me, could I get a copy of the Quran? Or you feel the next stage in your da'wah is to say, would you like a full copy of the Quran? And they say, oh, I would love one. Then again, you know, bring it for them in their language, ideally without the Arabic, if you can find it. Some you may not even be able to find unless they have the Arabic, in which case you might give it over with a disclaimer that please do, you know, if you don't want it anymore, or you finish reading it, you don't want to keep it anymore, then by all means you can just give it back to me rather than to throw it out. That would be great. Yeah.
Okay, another question from the sister side. Sister saying, I asked a non-Muslim if they believed in God. They answered no, but I believe there is something. Later I asked them what they believe regarding the purpose of life, and they answered that they don't know and prefer not to know. How will I continue da'wah with them?
Okay, very good question. So these are great practical situations people get themselves into. So the person asked the question, do you believe in God? And the person says, no, but I believe in something. So first of all, that in itself is a great place to stop and to go back. To say, well, I guess what the person is, maybe clarify and say, is it the case that what you're saying is that you don't know whether God exists or not? Or the person is saying there is no God, but there is something other than God. Then what is that? Could you tell me a little more about what that something might be? If the person doesn't give you any answer, like they just give you a contradiction, they say, look, I don't believe in God, but there's something, I believe in something, and they won't give you any more information than that, then I would suggest that you would say to them that, would you mind if I explain to you what I believe? And you don't worry about what they believe, and you just go straight into the message of Islam. La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah, and you explain it to them like that, and you don't worry about what they believe. Because sometimes their belief is like a defense mechanism. They actually just don't want to tell you what it is that they believe. Oh, I just believe in any, whatever, something. You know, so in this case, it's a good idea to sometimes just say, look, how about I tell you what I believe? And you tell them, and you give them a nice explanation of Islam, try and focus their attention on that. And the second part of, I don't want to know, that in itself is an emotional argument. That's why we said that atheism is emotional rather than rational. How can you not want to know whether you're going to be in Jahannam or not? That sounds like somebody who knows the truth, but doesn't want to take it, like, I don't want to know. You usually say, look, I'm not going to force it down your throat. Good manners, the person will allow you to explain further. But sometimes when people's beliefs don't make sense, just bypass them and go straight to what you believe. Because at least you've explained the message to them. Okay, so the brother...
What would you say to a person who says that he believes in God, but he's not ready to quit his bad habits which are haram in Islam?
Okay, this is a very good question. This one is really good. So, somebody says that I believe in God, but I'm not ready to leave my bad habits. This is actually very common. We get this in Dawah a lot, of people saying that I'm not ready to leave my bad habits. So in this we say, there is something you can say, but you have to be careful how you say it, because if you say it in the wrong way, you can really, really say the wrong thing. The wrong thing to say is, oh, you can just do all of your bad habits and don't worry about it. But the right thing to say is that, look, you doing your bad habits as a Muslim who believes those habits are wrong is far, far better for you than for you to do those bad habits as someone who's not a Muslim. I'm not saying you should do them. I believe they're bad and you believe they're bad. But at the end of the day, for you to do them as a Muslim is far, far better than for you not to become a Muslim at all. And talk to them about the hereafter. Look, if you die as a Muslim and you have some bad habits, some errors, at least eventually you'll go to paradise. But as for the person who dies without Islam, even if they have no bad habits at all, that person is not going to go to paradise. So you kind of approach it from that issue. But don't kind of say to them, oh, it's okay to do them. Because it's not okay. And if they believe it's okay, they might leave Islam through that. They might leave Islam through istihlal, through believing that it's okay. But try to give it to them from the point of view of, they are bad, you and me both know they're not right, but it's still better for you to be a Muslim. And we've had cases like that, like some really bad habits, like some things that are unacceptable in Islam, but you have to do it that way. It's like somebody says, look, I want to become Muslim, but I'm not ready to leave my girlfriend, for example. Like, this is very common, wallah, get used to this, this is very, very common. Say to them, look, you and I both know that having a girlfriend is not acceptable in Islam. And this is why, because of the importance of rights, and there's no rights for her, she has no protection. And marriage is very simple. But at the end of the day, I'd rather you be a Muslim with a girlfriend than a non-Muslim with one. Ultimately, at the end of the day, even though we both recognize that it is wrong, and we both recognize that it shouldn't be done, and I would encourage you to think of the alternative, which is very easy. Marriage is very easy in Islam. Because a lot of them may think that marriage is something very, very complicated, because in Christianity it can be extremely complicated. It's very, very simple. Simple contract between one to the other, very easy. So, you try from that angle, but you say, look, we both agree it's bad, but it's better for you to be a Muslim and have bad habits than it is for you not to be a Muslim. That's how I would deal with that issue.
Okay, the next question from sisters. Sister saying, when we approach people and make dawah, what if our knowledge is moderate and we may confuse the people rather than guide them?
Okay, very good question. What do we do if our knowledge is moderate? We feel we might confuse a person rather than guide them. It's really very simple. Two things you need to do. First of all, don't speak without knowledge. We said that about basira. When we talked about the theory of da'wah, don't speak without knowledge. So don't go in, know your limits. Don't go beyond your limits. If your limit is just explaining that there is one God and we worship Him, that's your limit. If your limit is you can explain a little bit about why we pray, that's your limit. If your limit is just a few of the mahasin, the beautiful things of Islam, that's your limit. But don't go over that. And the second thing is, Allah is showing you that you need to increase that knowledge. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is showing you that there's an opportunity for you to earn better than everything in the dunya. But you're not getting it because the knowledge is not there. So it should also encourage you to go and to learn more. This is just a taster session. I mean, we could do a da'wah workshop we could do 10 weeks like this and still not be finished. So this is just to give you a taste, but you can go and you can learn even more and practice more, sit more with people who give da'wah and pick up tips from them. Yeah. Yes. Salam to Allah.
Will he be held accountable for not giving dawah in this dunya for his colleague or close?
So as we said, it's kind of, the question's good. It's a question from the other, it's what we covered in the ruling of da'wah, but it's from the other side. So the question is, will a Muslim be held accountable for not giving da'wah to a colleague? So we said that da'wah is fardu kifaya. That means that it's a collective obligation. So in your workplace, that non-Muslim has only a certain number of Muslims they interact with. Let's say they interact with this guy, we're going to call him Jim. Jim, he interacts with 20 Muslims. Those are the people who have the potential to give him da'wah. One of those 20 has to take the responsibility. If none of them take it, all of those 20 people are sinful and they will be held to account by Allah Yawm al-Qiyamah. All of those 20, if none of them do it. But if one of them does it, the other 19, they don't need to do it for him, because it's a collective obligation. Does that make sense? Okay, excellent. So, one second, the questions, okay, questions coming back. Technical things, okay.
Okay, the next question from the sister is, how does one do da'wah to a born Muslim who is slowly moving away from Islam? And this is at the comment that it appears to be from having certain companions who are possibly taken away from Islam.
Well, it's a very, very good question. And it is something we deal with all the time. Again, like we tend to paint a very rosy picture about Islam and about how many people are becoming Muslim and about how many Muslims there are in the world and how we are the fastest growing religion. But there are a lot of people moving away from Islam. A lot of Muslims, born Muslim, moving away from Islam. And when you work in da'wah, you see this on a day-to-day basis. Even in countries which have strong Muslim populations, you have people who are sadly moving away from Islam. Either indeed, or even, even officially moving away, like officially saying, I'm not a Muslim anymore, or just completely leave practicing Islam from beginning to end. So the first thing we need to understand is why people go astray. So there's two fundamental reasons why people go astray, and those are shahawat and shubuhat, desires and misconceptions. So it's either that the person has desire to do something. So I want to do, like some people have said to me who have left Islam, that I just want to live my life, I want to be free. I want to be able to do all of these things. I want to be able to eat what I want, to drink what I want. I want to be able to go where I want. I want to be able to have a relationship with whoever I want. I don't want this restriction of halal and haram and so on. So this is shahwat. The person knows it's wrong. They're not saying, I don't believe it's wrong. They're saying, I believe it's wrong, but I want to do it. That's on one side. The other side is the person who has misconceptions. And usually you get a mix of both. So the misconception is that, how can I be a part of a religion that is unjust? Is Islam unjust? Of course not. But the person has a misconception about something in Islam that they think that it's unjust. So they've got a misconception. Or somebody says that, ever since I heard that, for example, a man can marry more than one woman, I've decided I don't want to be a Muslim anymore. So this is a misconception. The person doesn't understand the ruling of marriage in Islam, or doesn't understand what it means, doesn't understand the rules and regulations about it. So they've become confused about something. And often it's a mix of both. So sometimes it'll be a matter of desires that started them off, and then it fell in with confusions. Or some people will say, for example, there's an ayah in the Quran and this ayah is unfair, or this ayah is unjust. So again, it's a misconception. So misconceptions, how do you deal with them? You deal with them with knowledge. Misconceptions you can't deal with a stick, you can't beat it out of them. You have to give the knowledge and explain to them why they are wrong. But you also need to go and look at what are the desires, what are the emotions that are driving them towards that thing, or what are the factors. So if you've identified, as the questioner said, they've identified that the problem is the friends. So we're going to presume that this person doesn't have shubuhat, they're not confused about Islam, or they're not confused about Islam being right or wrong, but their friends are, from the point of view of desires, pulling them towards it. So here, there are certain things that you can do. One is you can try to jumpstart their iman with, whether it be something to remind them of Allah, something, a beautiful reminder you heard, or a maw'idha, a little speech that sort of instills in them a desire to sort of find something out. You can take them out of that friendship group and accompany them, spend time with them, take them out somewhere different with a different group of people, and try to just get that iman started again, get that stage where they're just starting to grow, and from there you can feed it. It's a long topic, but generally it helps to understand that people are either confused or they're either following their desires and their emotions. So you need to find out which one it is, because each one of them has a different solution to it. And you can, someone who's emotional, you can always call them back to Allah. But someone who's confused, if you don't remove that confusion, you can't call them back, because the confusion is, it's a problem of knowledge that's stopping them. Whereas the emotional person knows Islam is the truth, they just need a maw'idha, a reminder to bring them back to Islam. Whereas the one who is confused, that person's confusion is what is taking them away. So it's important to identify which of the two is predominant and deal with it, inshallah. Beautiful. Very good question. Excellent question. So the first question is da'wah only for non-Muslims? Well, it depends. It depends how we use the term. We could use da'wah and use it as a general term of calling people to everything that is good. And we can include in that the Muslim and the non-Muslim. But generally, when we talk about da'wah as a mustalah, as an istilah, as a terminology, we refer to it towards non-Muslims, and we use a different word for Muslims, like we use tarbiyah, or we use educating them, or we call it islah, correcting them, or whatever. But actually it's only terminology. You can use whichever one you want. You can say I give da'wah to Muslims, but the normal terminology is to use da'wah for non-Muslims, and to use a different terminology for the Muslims. But it's okay, both. You could use it in a general sense, specific sense. So the second question is a really good question, and very common. We experience this in da'wah. The problem of the non-practicing Muslim. So just when you're explaining Islam, and it gets worse than even the example you give, but just when you're explaining Islam, the person says, but there's another non-Muslim in the office, there's another Muslim in the office, and that Muslim doesn't do this, and that Muslim doesn't do that, and that Muslim doesn't do that. Worse than that is when that Muslim gets involved in your da'wah. Then, you have a big problem. Because you're giving da'wah and he's undoing your da'wah. This happens, really, it's happened to me numerous times. You come there and you're like, yeah, because as Muslims we don't drink. Why? There's nothing wrong with it. Why are you telling them not to celebrate Christmas? What's wrong with Christmas? And then that Muslim is getting involved. So There are different ways of dealing with that, but we'll stick to the ones that are legal. No, generally you want to have a quiet word with that Muslim on the side. When they're involved, I'm talking about when they're involved, you want to just pull them aside at a separate time and say, Akhi al-Kareem, brother please, wallahi what you're doing is you're really hurting this da'wah situation. And I'm not saying that, I know that we all are different levels of practicing, you and me, we're not on the same level, you're doing your own thing and you've made your choices and I respect that. But at the same time, please don't jump in with my conversation with this non-Muslim and prevent them from something good. That's one thing. But if in your case they're not involved, but they're just the bad example, then what I always do is differentiate between Islam and Muslims. This is also a really good way of dealing with extremism and terrorism and things like that, is differentiate between Islam and Muslim. A Muslim is a person who claims to follow Islam to a greater or lesser degree, attributes themselves to Islam. That person may be practicing 90%, 70%, 50%, 10%, 2%. At the end of the day, just like any one Christian doesn't represent Christianity, or if you're talking to a Hindu, any one Hindu doesn't represent Hinduism, likewise, no one Muslim represents Islam other than the Prophet, peace be upon him. He's the only one that represents Islam in human form. Otherwise, everyone else has their good points and their bad points. And that's why we say that, for example, if there is a Muslim who commits a violent act and says that I'm doing this for Islam, that doesn't justify that there's something wrong with Islam. There's just something wrong with that person. And even, we say to them, we judge Islam by the scripture and by the prophets. But we don't judge Islam by the action of an individual Muslim who, like everyone, is free to choose and to live with the consequences of the choices that they make. So that's how I deal. But the hardest one is when they get physically involved and they start giving da'wah on the other side. That's a very hard one to deal with. But generally take them aside and try to get them to gently not involve themselves in it. Sometimes they're just trying to help, but Allahumma musta'an, it is a problem. That's a difficult one. It's a great question, mashallah.
We have being a Daiee, how to overcome rejection upon inviting people, especially with your own family, relatives who reject your invitation.
Okay, very good question. I'll repeat the question on the mic, no problem. How to deal with rejection. So this is part of as-sabru ala al-adha, being patient in the harm that comes to you when things happen. Wallah, rejection it's a difficult thing to deal with. And we know it's difficult because it was difficult for the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. قَدْ نَعْلَمُ إِنَّهُ لَيَحْزُنُكَ الَّذِي يَقُولُونَ. We know that you are certainly saddened by what they say. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned the diq al-sadr, the fact that his chest he felt tight in the chest because the people wouldn't become Muslim. The people wouldn't believe. So rejection was hard for the Prophet ﷺ. So if it was hard for the Prophet ﷺ, you shouldn't be surprised that you find it hard. But there are some things mentioned in the Quran that will help to bring you relief. First of all, that you remember that guidance and misguidance are in the hands of Allah. They're not in your hands. The Prophet ﷺ strived and strived and strived to guide his uncle Abu Talib. In the end, his uncle passed away with the words, بَلْ عَلَى مِلَّةِ عَبْدِ الْمُطَّلِبِ, I die upon the religion of my grandfather, the polytheistic religion. He died like that. And Allah Azza wa Jal revealed, إِنَّكَ لَا تَهْدِي مَنْ أَحْبَبْتَ. You don't guide the one that you want. وَلَكِنَّ اللَّهَ يَهْدِي مَن يَشَاءُ. But Allah guides who He wants. So this is the first point. That you remember that your job is al-balagh, not guidance. Your job is to give the message. إِنَّمَا عَلَى رَسُولِنَا الْبَلَاغُ الْمُبِينَ. What our messenger has to do is to give the message in a clear way. That's all you have to do. Don't worry about guiding someone or someone didn't listen. You ask yourself, did I give that person the message in a clear way? You've done your job. That's one. That's another thing. And the third thing is, remember that when you give da'wah, you give it for Allah. You're not giving it for that person, you're not giving it for recognition, you're giving it for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the fourth thing is, remember that you've still got an opportunity as long as that person is alive. As long as that person is still alive, you've got an opportunity to be able to give those people da'wah. Maybe at a later stage, find a different way, go a different route, find someone who can approach them in a better way, inshaAllah ta'ala. From the brothers.
What if you think that the way we give dawah might turn them further away from the truth from Islam? Should we think that way, or should we?
Could you give me maybe like an example of it? Like, is the way, you mean the way if we give da'wah properly? So we're giving da'wah according to sunnah, the right way, but we think this is going to push them further away from Islam. So the first thing is, the only options available to us are those within the realm of the sunnah. We don't have an option to say, oh well, I think the sunnah is not working, let's do a different way. But within the sunnah, there may be different approaches. For example, you could approach them directly, you could ask someone to approach them on your behalf. These are all found within the sunnah. You could use literature, or you could speak to them directly. These are all found within the sunnah. The Prophet ﷺ wrote about Islam to people, and he also spoke about Islam to people. You could address a public, in private. These are all things that exist within the sunnah. But using something completely outside of the sunnah, like something that is not permitted in Islam, that's not an option. And we have to remember that our job is balagh, to give the message. To give the message. Our job is not to guide the person. So if we feel it's going to push them away, we give the message. We give it in the best way that we can do within the sunnah for them, and the rest is in the hands of Allah. But don't presume too much, because a lot of times you think that something is going to push a person away. And I remember people talking about, sometimes we'd approach a person for da'wah, and that person would be someone you will never ever think would ever accept Islam. You see somebody, just from the look of them, they just, they have a look of them that this person will never accept Islam. And another person who's really interested, they're like, oh, I came to ask about Islam, I'm really interested. And Allah guides the first and doesn't guide the second. It happens, subhanAllah, that you could see a person come, just the way they're dressed, the way they're behaving, the way they're acting. I mean, I have seen people, like in the UK, we have some of these extremist far-right, like anti-Islamic groups that burn the Quran and, shout like to kill the Muslims and, kick the Muslims out of Britain and all of this stuff. I've seen people among them become Muslim. I've seen with my own eyes, people among them become Muslim. This is a person who's outside shouting death to Islam, and half an hour later he's in the masjid saying, La ilaha illallah. Wallahi, don't presume that a person will not accept Islam. You don't know how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can guide a person. Wallahi. And sometimes the person you think is the closest, but they don't. And if you look among the Sahaba, you see the examples of that. You see, for example, the likes of Khalid ibn al-Walid radiyallahu an, the likes of Umar radiyallahu an, and others who became Muslim and became amazing Muslims. And then you see people like Abu Talib, who used to praise Islam in his poetry and say how wonderful Islam was, and he died as a non-Muslim. So you see how these, it's not always the person you think will become Muslim that does. You have a question from the...
Yes. This is the saying, if a non-Muslim, this one happens to be a Hindu, keeps on sharing her personal issues and she feels comfortable with me, how can I start a conversation about Islam? Should I do this when she is emotionally disturbed or whatnot?
So I'm not going to say to you should take advantage of a person, in a way that you wait for them to be really emotionally vulnerable and then you try to put Islam in there. But I do think that you should give Islamic solutions to their problems. So when they ask, look, I'm having problems at home, maybe with the spouse, with the children, give Islamic solutions to those problems and tell them that those solutions are Islamic solutions, that these are Islamic solutions to your problem. And honestly, why don't you think about embracing Islam? Why don't you consider learning about Islam and embracing Islam? Because Islam has in it the solution to every problem. That's the kind of way that I would take it from. I would try and take it from that angle, inshallah.
What are your suggestions for the Christmas seasons when the colleagues are most of them are Christians and
That's a good question. How do we handle the Christmas season? So it's often the case that, you know, around you may see people celebrating Christmas. You may see them have a Christmas tree, or you may see them talk about going for a Christmas party or Christmas celebration. I think first of all, you have to be a bit careful with Christmas, is that Christmas is celebrated, as you rightly mentioned, by many different religions, including often atheists and agnostics as well, who will also celebrate Christmas, which is very strange. But it's become like almost like a sort of a secular sort of party season as opposed to a real religious thing. So distinguish between the religious Christian who is celebrating Christmas because they believe in it, and the sort of person who's just joining in on the side. But I think the best thing you can do is use it as a talking point. You know, I mean, I hope inshallah you don't go into a place and there's a, you know, big Christmas tree there, but if it happens and that happens to you and somebody asks you about it, use it as a talking point. Use it as a point that, you know, I see the Christmas tree is up in the office or whatever, or on your desk, or you've got one at home, or they show you the picture. And then talk about how Muslims say, do you know that as Muslims we believe in Jesus but we don't celebrate Christmas? Have you ever thought about that? And the person, okay, wow, you know, you believe in Jesus but you don't celebrate Christmas. What's that about? You know, and then you can go on to talk about Islam. So I would just use it as a talking point, as a point of, to pass your message of Islam over to people, if you're in a situation where somebody raises it or mentions it. But if somebody asks you if you want to participate, you can't participate in any kind of, obviously, non-Muslim celebration or secular celebration like Christmas. So you can't like say, yeah, I'll take part or whatever. But you can use it as a talking point. Like they go off to their Christmas party and say, oh, you went off to your Christmas party, but I can't come. Say, why can't you come? Say, well, as a Muslim. And then you know, you're getting into, you're talking about Islam and explaining Islam to them. And of course, it's going to come to the issue that Khalid is going and Ahmed is going and, you know, those problems. They said it's okay. But you know, you can deal with that in its own way, you know, by saying, look, it's not about individual preferences, like individual Muslims are different, but as per the religion of Islam, we believe in Jesus as a prophet, peace be upon him, but we don't celebrate Christmas, and we don't believe that Jesus is the Son of God. We believe that God is alone, has no partner. And that's, you know, inshallah, a way to get talking point on Islam, inshallah.
Okay, another one was this. How does one stand their ground when they're singled out in academic settings like university classroom and asked to defend an Islamic tenet to a general group of people in terms of their faith? So the group is general, different religions, and they're asked, as being the Muslim, to defend.
Okay, so there are two answers to this question, depending on whether you're given time to prepare or not. If you're given time to prepare really, really well. Prepare really well and ask people, you know, really prepare it and research it and bring knowledge. Sometimes you're put on the spot. And I think when you're put on the spot in that case, most of the time you should accept. And the reason you should accept is that not accepting may be the greater of the two evils here. Because when you say, look, I'm sorry, I'm not willing to accept, or I'm not willing to defend it, it almost makes it feel to people like your religion can't be defended. However, when you do defend it, and you've got no notice, you're just told defend it, start your defense by saying that I don't speak about knowledge. Talk in generalities, that look, Islam is a religion of justice, it's a religion of fairness to all, it's a religion of honor, it's a religion where nothing is forbidden except for a reason and a benefit for you. It's a religion which benefits all of mankind. As for this specific issue, I'm only going to talk about as much knowledge as I have. And when I don't have knowledge about it, I'm going to stop, because one of the greatest sins in Islam is to speak about God without knowledge, and so on. So that's how I would on the spot defend it. If somebody said to me, like, defend the Islamic position on slavery or something like that, and I don't have any preparation, I don't have anything prepared, I don't know the ayat, I don't know the hadith, I don't know what to say, then I would go and I would just give a general defense of Islam, that Islam is a religion that came to call people away from slavery to creation into slavery to the Creator. But I wouldn't go into something I don't know, and I would apologize to the people and say, I apologize to you guys, that I'm not going to give you a full and detailed description, simply because in our religion we don't speak without knowledge. And we don't defend something just for the sake of it. So I would be more than happy to go back this evening, to research it, to come back to you tomorrow and to provide you with a knowledge-based answer. However, for now, this is all I know, this is the most that I know, and I'm going to stop there. That's how I would defend it if it was that kind of question. Some questions from the brothers? Yes, Amin.
What if any non-Muslim ask question that how can you claim that Quran is really word of God? Because Christians can also say that the Bible is also word of God.
This is also a very good question. So someone says, how can you claim that Islam is the word, that the Quran is the word of God, when a Christian can also claim that the Bible is the word of God? Or any other book. It doesn't have to be the Bible. So I would deal with this by quoting a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, in which he said that if people were given what they claimed, if people were given things based on what they claimed, people would have taken the wealth and the reputation of people, it would be taken away without right. But as the Prophet ﷺ said, al-bayyina al-mudda'i, the person who claims something has to bring a proof for it. So any of us can claim this book is the truth, this book is the word of God. But what I'm going to say to you is that this Quran brings you a proof. It's not a claim. It's not my claim or the claim. It brings you a proof. And if someone makes a claim, they should bring a proof for it. Like in this hadith, al-bayyina al-mudda'i. A person who makes a claim has to bring the proof for that claim. That's how I would approach it. And say that, let's look at their proof, and let's look at our proof, and let's look at which is, which ideally, I mean, you don't really want it to be a Bible comparison class, but the idea that, look, let me present my proof and you decide what proof you feel is more weighty, inshallah.
Okay, another question from the sisters is, while inviting a non-Muslim towards Islam, a commonly asked question by them is, how can you prove that God is only one? Moreover, they even ask, how can you believe in the unseen? So how do you answer these type of questions?
Okay, so that's a very good question. How can you prove that God is one? So when it comes to God, there's only three ways you can know about anything. There's only three ways you can know about anything. Either you can see it, or either you can compare it to something you know, or either you have a reliable report that comes up concerning it. So when we apply this to God, we can't see God. God is from the world of the unseen. We can't see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala until we die. The Prophet ﷺ said, you will not see your Lord until you die. So if we can't see Him, can we compare Him to something? Can we say God is like this or like that? لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٌ وَهُوَ السَّمِيعُ الْبَصِيرُ. There is nothing like Him, and He is the all-seeing, the all-hearing, the all-seeing. So we can't compare Him to anything. So if we can't compare Him to anything, and we can't see Him or sense Him, then the only thing that we have left is the reliable sort of transmission or a reliable report. And therefore the only way we can know God is through His revelation. Yes, naturally, we can talk about fitrah, naturally we're inclined to worship one God. Naturally people are not inclined to worship everything. People are inclined to worship one God who is above. That is the natural inclination of everybody. That's why when people say, oh, God help me, like that, everybody does it. Non-Muslim atheists even. When the ship is sinking, there's no atheists on a sinking ship, as they say. And when the ship is sinking, nobody's atheist at that time. Everyone is like, oh my God, help me. So at that time, people have a natural inclination. Yes, you can talk about the signs in the universe. The signs in the universe indicate one God, not many gods. Because for example, like the Quran says, and the Quran gives here dalilun aqliyun shar'i, a logical shar'i proof for this, that if there were in this universe more than one God, each of them would have competed with each other. And each of them would have taken what they created and made it theirs. And they would have tried to overcome each other. So as a simple example of this, just look at the story of the Greek gods. Greek gods, a lot of people know about Greek mythology and Greek gods, yeah? Constantly fighting each other. Wars with each other, betraying each other, fighting each other, killing each other, you know, getting this one on top, this one sneaks in the back, this one stole this thing, this one kidnapped this one, this one. This is exactly what would happen if there was more than one God. They would have لَذَهَبَ كُلُّ إِلَهٍ بِمَا خَلَقَ. Every single God would have taken what they created, وَلَا عَلَى بَعْضُهُمْ عَلَى بَعْضٍ. And they would have just tried to fight each other and overcome each other. So even creation indicates that there is only one God. But what's the clear proof? The clear proof is Scripture. And the Scripture we have, which we can prove is from Allah, through the miraculous nature of the Qur'an and the way that it cannot be from anything other than Allah. This Qur'an tells us and proves to us that God is one. Even though we can sense that from our nature, and we can also sense it from the creation around us, the final firm proof, لِأَنْ لَا يَكُونَ لِلنَّاسِ عَلَى اللَّهِ حُجَّةٌ بَعْدَ الرُّسُلِ. So that there can be no proof for people against Allah after the messengers were sent.
Just to follow up, you mentioned that guidance and non-guidance will happen only with the will of Allah, as we all believe. There is many times this argument that happens that what is under the control of human beings, of Muslims or non-Muslims, what is under our influence? Because everything will happen or not happen by the will of Allah.
Excellent.
Written destiny as well as non-destiny.
Beautiful. So this is something you really need to be familiar with in Dawah, because it comes up a lot. And that is questions related to qadr, destiny, predestination. A lot of people have questions about this, a lot of Muslims, but also a pretty large number of non-Muslims as well. It's one of the fundamental questions that religion is supposed to answer. Why does evil happen? What is in our control? If it's all destined, what can we do? Now, it's a big answer, but I've got, like, if you want, I've got a full video on it. You can just type in Muhammad Tim Qadr, and I've got like a 1 hour and a half or something video that goes through the whole thing. But very briefly, I'm just going to give you a synopsis answer that you can use. First of all, as Muslims, we believe that God knows everything. That's the first step. So you step with the person, like, are you with me you're talking to a non-Muslim now? You with me that God knows everything? Usually most people are fine with that. They're like, right, yeah, fair enough. God knows everything. Okay. Number two, if God knows everything, it is not difficult for God to write it down. Like, if I know my name, it's not hard for me to write down my name. If I know the directions home, it's not hard for me to draw how to go home. If God knows everything, it's not hard for Him to write everything. Usually people up to there also are okay. The next one is where people start to get a little bit shaky, which is that everything happens by God's will. First of all, we say, what's the alternative to that? What would be the alternative? The alternative would be that I can overrule God or overpower God. And that definitely not be possible. So we know that things must happen by God's will. But at the same time, we also recognize, everybody recognizes that we have a will. Like, I'm choosing what to say, choosing what to do, choosing when to stop the class, all that type of stuff. However, my will can't override or go over God's will. So for example, my intention was to finish all the subjects, including answers to commonly asked questions, but now I think that I might not be able to finish it. That was my will, but God didn't will for me to finish it all. I willed it, but God didn't will for me to finish it all. So when I will something, it still requires God to allow that to happen or not allow that to happen, or to will that to happen or not will that to happen. And that affirms that we as human beings have a will, we have a choice, and we'll be taken into account for our choices, and we'll be asked about what we did and what we didn't do. But ultimately, we can't execute a choice that we have made without the will of God. And that means that we're all servants of God in need of Him to help us, and that, so we work hard. But we add that to something to that so that people understand, is that God has promised He will help the people who work hard. So we work really, really hard, we try really hard, and we ask God to help us in that. That's how I would explain it, very briefly. But I have a nice long lecture on it. If you want to type in Muhammad Tim Qadr, we talk about guidance, misguidance, will, action, creation, a lot of other aspects in it. But for now, that's how I would in a short way explain it to people, inshallah. Yeah, we have time, inshallah.
This one's an interesting one. is the evolution of human beings true, and from where did people get this idea?
Okay, so this is a very good question, and I'll make it the last one because of the timing. We want to finish according to the time. We don't want to take too long with the whole or anything like that. But at the same time, inshallah, we will try to keep the questions, and maybe next time we have an opportunity in front of the camera, we can try to record the answers to those questions, inshallah ta'ala. So even if the brothers have additional questions they didn't get answered, if you would like to write them down and put them on the podium at any time to this evening, we will try to answer them. So, very, very, very important as a Muslim for yourself, and especially when giving da'wah to atheists, agnostics, or even Muslims who've gone a bit off the path, is the topic of evolution. So the scholars of Islam and the Ummah of Islam have consensus that human beings did not evolve according to the Darwinian theory of evolution. That is a matter of consensus. And to reject it is an act of disbelief. If somebody says that the scholars say, if somebody says Adam came from, that Adam, the first human being, came from a monkey or an ape, he's not a Muslim. Even just by saying that. Even if he says we all came from Adam, but Adam came from a chimpanzee or an ape, then he's not a Muslim. Even if that is, so how about the one that says that we all came from that? Because it's an act of disbelief in the Quran. Allah Azza wa Jal told multiple times that He created Adam, and that He created Adam from nothing. For example, like the ayah, إِنَّ مَثَلَ عِيسَى عِنْدَ اللَّهِ كَمَثَلِ آدَمَ. The example of Isa in the sight of Allah is like the example of Adam. He created him from turab. He created him from dust. ثُمَّ قَالَ لَهُ كُنْ فَيَكُونَ. Then He said, be, and it is. So how do we, the next question is, well, what about evolution as a concept? Do we as Muslims even accept that animals evolved but just human beings didn't? To the best of my research, you can't even say it about animals. Although the issue of animals is not as clear as the issue of humans, but still, it's very problematic. If you say it about animals, it's also very, very problematic. But the stronger, or the right way to answer it, the correct answer is to say that we don't accept the Darwinian theory of evolution about humans or about non-humans. We don't accept it at all. And what you're going to see when you look into the Darwinian theory of evolution is, you're going to see that it's a theory that is really a religious belief, in the sense that it requires belief in the ghaib. Wallah, to believe in Darwinian evolution requires belief in the ghaib. You have to believe in the unseen. The unseen that will tell you eventually what is going to happen. Because, and there's a nice video on this where they went around asking a bunch of PhD students whether Darwinian theory is fact or belief. And wallah, at the end you come to the conclusion it is a belief, it's not a fact. It's a belief. It's based upon, I believe that we will one day have the answer as to how this works. A couple of things, I'm not going to talk about evolution too long, it's a long topic, but just a couple of things just to give you some increased yaqeen, some increased confidence in this. The basic principle of Darwinian evolution rests upon the concept of survival of the fittest, which is that the animal that is best adapted to its environment is the one that will survive. Yalla. Now let's talk then, about what? Let's talk about let's talk about a bird that turns into, or let's talk about a climbing animal that turns into a bird. So you have an animal that is climbing, and it evolves over millions of years into a bird. Remember that Darwinian evolution is built upon the concept that survival of the fittest. The best one has to survive. So here's an animal that has fully formed hands and arms and legs, and it's climbing away. And over 1 million years, those hands and legs shrink and they become wings. How does that work with survival of the fittest? It cannot work, because there is no competitive advantage for millions of years for that animal. In other words, if that were true, it would be a proof for the existence of God. because it would be a proof of intelligent decree happening. Because how can you have an animal that started with hands, then it lost a finger? Now why has that animal got an advantage over the next one? Then it lost 2 fingers. Why has that animal got an advantage over the next one? Then it lost all its fingers and now it's just got stumps. How has that animal got an advantage over the next one? Then it lost its stumps and it got flaps. How now has that animal got an advantage over the next one? For 2, 3, 4 million, 200 million years, that animal has no advantage over its peers. In fact, it's disadvantaged. But it's only advantage when it finally grows wings. Or the other way around, the wings turned into stumps. How is that animal advantaged? There's no way to explain that. It fundamentally doesn't work unless you say that it was guided by God and that God inspired that animal to eventually grow wings or grow hands or grow fingers or whatever it did. You can't justify it because it requires intelligence to make that decision of what to change. It can't be by the survival of the fittest. The second thing we're going to prove, because they might say, no, you've only got some examples, other examples are easy to explain, like the first animal that crawled out the sea had an advantage to the next one. Yeah, it just grew 2 lungs like overnight, and then it had an advantage. But anyway, that's another topic. Now we've got another problem. And this is, again, something that you, with regard to Darwinism that you see, we have never ever seen a single proof of change of kind. We've never ever seen, not in bacterial models, not in laboratories, not in simulations. We cannot see any time where something changed into something completely different. It's never been seen, not even in a bacterial model. And bacteria should be able to show it, because bacteria reproduce much, much more quickly than people. So you can simulate 1 billion years with bacteria in 20 years in the lab or something. So the reality is, with all these bacterial experiments, they change a little bit, but they don't change from bacteria into birds. They don't change from bacteria into worms. They don't even change from bacteria into significantly different bacteria. They just go from a little bit small, a little bit long, a little bit short, a little bit long. They don't realistically change. And the same thing in the animal world. We have never ever seen, we'll see a fish Darwin very famously looked at the bird's beaks. And the bird's beak is whatever, getting longer or getting shorter. But Darwin, it's still a bird. It's not even still a bird, it's still the exact same kind of bird that you were looking at before. So to look at a bird whose beak got longer and to summarize from that a bird could turn into a monkey, could turn into a human being, really it requires a lot of faith. But it's a theory that actually is designed to promote atheism. That's what it's there for. It's there to promote atheism, because it answers the question of, if God didn't create the world, who did? That's the only reason the Darwinian theory exists. Otherwise, scientifically, it's worthless. It's just a matter of iman bil ghaib. I believe that one day there will be an answer. So that's those are my thoughts on that. That's just a few quick things. It's not a scientific reply. If you want a proper reply, there are books that answer it thoroughly in detail. But just a couple of points that people, can't struggle to answer. Like, for example, the bee. Like the bee, how did that get through survival of the fittest? It's totally the wrong shape. It's the wrong shape to fly. It's big, fat, belly, and it's got small wings, and it doesn't match any of Darwin's theory of survival of the fittest or things like that. So these are things you can read better in books, but just to give you something to go away. I don't want you to go away thinking about it and it to settle in your heart. So I just wanted to give you a few things just to take it out of yourself, and then you can read a lot more about it later on, inshallah ta'ala. And Allah Azza wa Jal knows best. Wassalatu wassalamu ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in.
I'd like to thank